Hi, everyone. I'm Eva Yazari. I'm the managing partner of Beyond Capital Ventures. I'm here with Dave and Jayant, and we are going to be discussing their company, Alt Mobility. Alt Mobility is an EV leasing business based in India that has recently entered the Beyond Capital Ventures Fund 3 portfolio. Welcome, Dave. Welcome, Jayant. Great to have you both in this conversation.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Ava.
So, as a start, why don't you just start from the ground up? What motivated you to start Alt Mobility?
Dan, do you want to take this?
Sure. Um, so alt mobility basically by definition is a EV leasing and lifecycle management platform. Essentially, all the founders in the company have their background in renewable energy. So we all had our businesses for setting up solar CNI projects in India since way back 2013-14. And the main selling point for selling cheaper solar electricity was that there was a differential in the tariff of grid electricity versus the solar electricity. So that 2-3 rupees differential delta was the main selling point for the customer without any investment from their pockets. So in 2018-19, we figured out this opportunity in the EV space. We were like that if we were able to replicate the same principle in mobility, then the delta of savings would be significantly higher because a unit of fuel in India is typically around 80-90 rupees, whereas a unit of electricity is around 10 rupees. And the vehicle runs for the same equivalent kilometers in a unit of fuel or a unit of electricity. So the savings is around 70 to 80 rupees. So this was a big chunk of savings. So that's why we figured out and we identified the right asset class, which was the commercial vehicles. And we thought that, okay, this will lead to impact in climate change. Plus, it will also transform the lives of the peoples by enabling them access to vehicles. So that was the starting thought initially.
Incredible. And I think what you just outlined was the impact is not only climate impact, but it's also social impact. Can you maybe walk us through potentially the drivers or the kind of impact of the individuals who are operating the vehicles and what their impact or what kind of their improvement of livelihood would be?
Sure. So as a concept in the Indian logistics sector, the drivers are either employed by the larger logistics or aggregating companies, or they get access to older second-hand diesel or fuel vehicles. So when we brought around this concept with electric vehicles, then this for the first time gave them access to brand new vehicles. So when we provide the vehicle to the driver, then the driver is able to earn a livelihood for his entire family, and plus he becomes the owner of the asset in a designated time period. So this means and translates into complete financial independence for the driver and his family. So largely, and all this is coming from the amount which he's saving from the fuel costs. So this is the most incredible thing. So there is no increment in his expenses, but at the same time he is provided access to a brand new vehicle. So what we have seen as a practical experience, the drivers who have run the vehicles diligently good enough for a year's time have come back to us to get a second or a third vehicle also. So there is a huge impact in their livelihoods, I would say.
And what's very interesting is
Incredible.
that about 70% of our drivers are first-time users. So they've never had, driven a vehicle before. They were either unemployed or they were working at a job which didn't pay as well. And the second profile of drivers is essentially who had low credit scores and were unable to get access to finance by traditional financing institutions. And what we are able to essentially provide them is basically an income generating asset, right? As Janet mentioned, the income that is generated is essentially used to pay off the lease. So we see a lot of impact that happens on their earnings.
I wanted to add that this is the second e-mobility business in our portfolio, and what you've just substantiated is similar in the company that we're invested in Africa. And what we've observed is that the driver is not as concerned about the climate impact and is obviously most concerned about their savings. So it's great that, a business like Alt Mobility has the double bottom line in order to, meet the driver where they are, not be naive about their needs. And as you pointed out, this is an income producing vehicle, but also be aware of the fact that, the climate transition is urgent and there's an impact to be had there as well. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
In fact, this is also being promoted now by city government. So, for example, Delhi has recently put out a draft policy, which is effective August of this year, where any new sale of commercial vehicles has to be mandatory electric.
Yeah.
That's a major transformation that's happening. So you have strong government policies and subsidies which are promoting this sector. You have economic incentive with the driver in terms of the savings that they can generate by switching. And then you also have corporate sustainability commitments by Walmart, backed Flipkart, and many other e-commerce and logistic companies to transition to electric. And so when
Mhm.
all of these three factors come, together, it's an unparalleled transformation. And we've been, in the energy space before with solar. We saw some of this happen in solar, and India is now one of the largest leaders of renewable energy, probably the lowest kilowatt hour renewable energy producer globally. We're now seeing that transition happen successfully for electric, and it's not a transformation that's going to happen in a decade. This is all going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years for commercial fleets.
Absolutely. It's so great to be an investor in your company. And we'll talk about, when we invested and what it enabled the business to do later on as a part of the round. However, let's talk a little bit more about your long-term vision. Where do you see alt mobility going in the next 5 years?
So essentially, we when we started the business, we were essentially focused on serving B2B customers, which is essentially large fleet operators. And that was largely because we were nascent. The early adopters in the EV segment were fleet operators. Very recently, over the last year, we've added a new customer segment, which is the driver come owner. And this is basically in India, compared to Western markets, about 90% of the market is either drivers or very small fleet operators. So it's a very fragmented market. Um, so what we're seeing is that today, if you look at our portfolio, it's about 90% B2B and 10% drivers. Over the next few years, you will see a transformation happen, not in just in the market, but also reflected in our portfolio, where we are anticipating over the next year about 50% of our customer base shifting to drivers, where we are able to really create that social impact directly to the driver come owner segment. We're so as a part of this expansion, we realize that the credit risk that we take in a B2B is far lower compared to driver segment. But as we're increasing the risk on the credit side, we also realize the urgent need to have more control over the asset. Leasing essentially means it's an asset underwriting play, less of a customer underwriting play, where we are able to take far more bets on lower credit scores, new to credit users, and so on. So, as a part of our strategy to improve our asset bankability, there's a lot of focus that the company is doing in terms of standardization of the battery technology, where we are going to be becoming an original design manufacturer, where we're essentially contract manufacturing the battery pack. The IP is already in-house. We've tested the vehicle over the last 3 years and seen extremely strong competence in terms of the performance of the product. And so that's the core focus area of how we're able to bring in standardized battery packs, assemble them in third-party OEMs, and essentially be able to create a far more bankable product with higher uptime and a longer life, which essentially allows for the driver to enjoy the lowest total cost of ownership over the lifetime of the asset. So imagine a product in the market which runs for about 3 years. Here, you're increasing the lifespan of the vehicle to at least 5 years and allowing the driver to essentially have higher income and savings. Those are going to be core
Incredible.
pillars. So expansion on the customer side, expansion on the product side. Obviously, we're expanding across multiple geographies. We have done about 30 cities so far for B2B, about 2 states for B2C. And as we progress, we'll be expanding more cities as well.
Yeah, I mean, in the leasing model, I think it's really important that your asset has a longer life. So I think integrating your own battery is extremely key in that part of the equation. And as you say, it also translates to driver benefits. So thank you for spelling that out. I would love to just double click on, when you receive capital from an investment firm like Beyond Capital Ventures, what does that help you achieve? You outlined your vision, but more immediately, how is our capital supporting not only your impact, but of course, the commercial goals of the company?
Absolutely. So all of this capital is growth capital. Just to give you an update on numbers, we're close to now about March ending about 30 million AUM. And close to about 10 million ARR. So there's a significant, about 8 to 10 million ARR. So there's a significant growth. All of this capital is used for growth. The company has closed the financial year, and this is the third financial year profitably. So we essentially use the proceeds of the capital to expand our asset base, both on an asset-heavy on-book model as well as on an asset-light model. So it's a combination of both. And essentially, the vehicles that we put on the ground help us in sustaining recurring lease rentals over a period of 3 to 5 years, from which we're able to cover all the expenses. So objective is for us to now, with the capital that we raised in September, which was about 10 million, to essentially be able to churn out an AUM of close to about 40 to 50 million by closer to the end of the year. And essentially expand that, as I mentioned, in different cities, expanding our battery standardization capabilities, expanding our customer base. So all of that is essentially going to be used towards this growth. And probably later on towards the year, we'll be looking at probably a Series B round as well.
So the capital is, when you say increase your AUM, that's the capital that you're utilizing to purchase the assets, correct? And thereby you purchase the assets and then you are leasing out the assets to either the corporates or to the actual riders or drivers, as we're calling them. I think that's important to unpack because the leasing model may not be known to some of our investors and those that are listening to this conversation.
So it's a combination of debt and equity. About 15% is going to be probably 15, 20% is going to be equity, and the remaining is in the form of debt. On
Yeah.
the on-balance sheet model and off-balance sheet, we provide probably a small FLDG of about 10%, and about 100% of financing is done by the lender on their books. That's how the model essentially works.
Understood. Thank you for that. So finally, I want to ask kind of a more personal question. Which leaders inspire you and why?
So
Go
I'll
ahead,
take
Jay.
that
Yeah.
first. Yeah, so it's not essentially the renowned world leaders or prominent figures which inspire me personally. So I have seen the Indian entrepreneurs grow in the past 30 to 40 years with the expansion of the economy. So personally, I have known large business houses which have reached this scale today, but they all started with a one man putting his thoughts on the ground. So essentially, all these Indian businesses which have now grown to multi-billion dollar conglomerates and started by a single entrepreneur. So these entrepreneurs are our larger inspiration. So how efficiently they have created the entire ecosystem infrastructure and developed the complete wealth around for the businesses.
Dave,
Yeah, and
do you have an
talking
answer to
talking a
that?
little again, probably not a specific person as such, but even talking about the EV ecosystem and the founders that are operating here, I think there's a significant amount of resilience because
Mm.
what Jayant was talking about, people who have built the previous companies who've now sustained for about 30, 40, 50 years, decades, right? But also the entrepreneurs that are working in the EV ecosystem who are challenging these incumbents. And essentially across, different OEMs that are building new technologies to looking at new infrastructure providers to looking at, technology providers, financing players. So all of them are essentially challenging the status quo and facing a lot of heat, because all of them have strong distribution networks, immense amount of capital. We're essentially looking at the transformation of the EV ecosystem and the automotive ecosystem completely here. And so that transformation essentially requires founders to be extremely resilient. We're seeing obviously these struggles real time because we interact with a lot of founders on a day-to-day basis, and we understand their challenges, but we also understand that they're creating something unique. And this transformation also requires a new way of thinking. We're thinking very differently, for example, about how financing will be transformed with the introduction of smart and more connected vehicles, with data being a very, very large play. That's something that incumbents probably don't understand today. And so that resilience is something that I really want to kind of I admire about the founders that we interact across with the ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, I marvel every single day at the growth in India, and the entrepreneurial growth and the innovation that is coming out of the country. It's why I've dedicated my career to investing in India in part, despite not being from the country. I've been going to the country for 20 years. It's abundantly clear what is possible, and what is also possible to lead in the rest of the world, which is so exciting to me. So I'm grateful for both of you and the work that you're doing, simply because I know that you are a part of this leadership wave that you are talking about, and contributing to it for sure. And it's an absolute pleasure to have had this conversation. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for what you've created at Alt Mobility. We at Beyond Capital Ventures are excited to see what's next for you. Thank you both.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Eva.
Eva. Super grateful to
Uh,
have Beyond as part of our team.
It's our pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks.